Well, over the last 15 or 20 years, interest in genealogy has skyrocketed in the United States. In fact, it's been named recently the second most common hobby just behind gardening in the United States. Part of the indication of this is that when it comes to appropriate websites, okay, these are the number one most the number one type of site that's visited on the internet is genealogy websites like Ancestry.com and stuff like that. A few years ago, my dad and I started kind of looking into ours and the Duke family name, and we traced it all the way back to the 1400s in England. So I'm British, guys. I was pretty excited about that. Some of you have heard my British accent and you're like, no, you're not. But we traced it all the way back to the 1400s in England, and there was this town there, and looked up a few pictures of it, but couldn't find a lot. And if I'm not kidding you, 2 weeks later, we were downtown Waynesville in Stonetown Coffee, and we were there with these two college-age girls, and they both had British accents. And I'm like, well, those are great accents, really beautiful accents. So I said, where are you guys from? I mean, obviously, but where at? And so they started telling us where they were from. And so I said, that's crazy. My dad and I just did this, and we found, that we were from this city. And they actually were like, we were just there. And so they pulled up pictures on their phone, and they showed me all these beautiful pictures of this place. The really interesting thing about that whole experience of going through the genealogies and kind of like reading about some of these family names and stuff like that is that it gives you a sense of identity. It kind of grounds you in something. It maybe even gives you a sense that you're a part of something that's bigger than just your 77 years here on this earth. That you're a part of something that has some longevity, right? And what you do now will carry on. So maybe you've had that same experience. Maybe you've looked into your genealogy, to your ancestry, and you found some really cool things. Maybe you're related to somebody famous. I don't know. But all of that, I think, gives us a sense of being grounded, a sense of identity. While we love our own genealogies, most people don't love our genealogies. You might have tried this at a party before, and you're like, yeah, I was looking into my genealogy, and like within 3 seconds, people were like, yeah, I don't care, like, why are you telling me this? I wish you would stop talking to me about this. Why? Because genealogy is just a list of names, right? And so people are telling you about where they came from and, who their ancestors are. You're like, I want to care, but I don't because I don't know who any of these people are. Well, that's kind of how we feel when we read through the Bible, right? And one of these genealogies pops up. Anybody skip these? Does anybody, you just get to them and you're like, Genesis chapter 11, I'm going to skip that because I don't know any of the names. Anybody? Okay, a lot of people do. It's because we don't know, who a lot of these people are, and so we just kind of skip over them. However, genealogies are so important. They're so important in the Bible because they kind of connect things all the way through the story for us. Matthew chooses to start his gospel with a genealogy. And if you don't know any of the names, it's a boring one. So in order to spice it up a little bit, we're going to do a little bit, we're not just going to read it, we're going to do something a little bit different.
Abram, he had Isaac. Isaac, he had Jacob. Jacob, he had Judah and his kin. Then Perez and Zerah came from Judah's woman Tamar. Perez, he brought Hezron up, and then Cain.
And then Aminadab, then Nahshon, who was then dad of Salmon, who was Raven, father Boaz. Ruth, she married Boaz, who had Obed, who had Jesse. Jesse, he had David, as we know as King. David, he had Solomon by dead Uriah's wife. Solomon, well, you all know him. He had good old Rehoboam, followed by Abijah, who had Asa. Asa had Jehoshaphat, had Joram, had Uzziah, who had Jotham, then Ahaz and Hezekiah.
Followed by Manasseh, who had Amon, who was father of a good Josiah, who grandfathered Jehoiakim, who caused the Babylonian captivity because he was a liar.
Then he asked Shealtiel, who back at Zerubbabel, who at Abiad, who had Eliakim. Eliakim had Azar, who had Zadok, who had Achim. Achim was the father of Eliakim.
He had Eliezer, who had Nathan, who had Jacob. Now listen very closely, I don't want to sing this twice.
Nope.
Jacob was the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, the mother of Christ.
So we're going to transition now. Remember the first section of the teaching, the word genealogy. Okay, moving on. I can't even say genealogy, and they just said all those hard names in a song. So that's cool. Well, we turn the pages a few pages, and we get to John's gospel. And John actually has a little bit of a different take on the birth story. He actually starts out like this. This is a little bit of a summary of verses 1 through 14 of John 1. He says, "In the beginning, the Word already existed. The Word was with God, and the Word was God. He existed in the beginning with God. God created everything through him, and nothing was created except through him. The Word gave life to everything that was created, and his life brought light to everyone. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness can never extinguish it. So the Word became human and made his home among us." So John actually introduces one of the extraordinary claims of Christianity, which is that God became a human. God became a human. This, throughout history, is a piece of theology that has been called, if you know it, say it with me, the incarnation. The incarnation is what this has been called. Now, if we were listing out the non-negotiable tenets of Christianity, you'd have to put the incarnation right at the very top of the list, because the Christian claim of the incarnation, that God became a human in the person of Jesus Christ, is absolutely foundational. So if you have a game of Jenga, picture Christian theology as a game of Jenga, and you pull out, the incarnation, the whole thing crumbles. The incarnation is that important. J.I. Packer, who is a prominent theologian, once wrote, "The real difficulty, the supreme mystery, which with the gospel confronts us, is the Christmas message of incarnation. The really staggering Christian claim is that Jesus of Nazareth was God made man." Then he goes on to say that this is a real stumbling block for Christianity. When it comes to people, there's all kinds of stuff that people find difficult to believe about Christianity. He says this is the stumbling block that trips everybody up. If you can't get past this, you can't accept any of it. That God injected himself into creation and actually became a human. C.S. Lewis wrote a similar thing in his book Miracles. He said that the incarnation is actually the central miracle. And that if we have trouble believing other miracles that happened, Jesus healing somebody, or just go down the list, any of the other miracles, if we have trouble believing those, they're actually rooted in our inadequate belief in the incarnation. Now, you may or may not know that the incarnation became a subject of debate in church history. Around the 4th century, there was some heresy, is what it's called. It got stirred up, and it was all about whether or not Jesus really is God. Okay? Now, there are some different viewpoints on this that people were presenting. One was that Jesus, he was just a normal guy, but he had some special gifts and talents. Okay, there's another one, it's kind of weird. It says that Jesus wasn't real, he just appeared to be real. He's like a spirit figure that looked human, but he wasn't real. And then the third one, which is the most common one in that time period, was that Jesus was created by God, and he's like an inferior being, right, because he's created by God, but he's not actually God himself. And so all of this controversy led to what we now know as the seminal work, the most important work probably ever written on the Incarnation. It's called On the Incarnation. And it was written by a church father named Athanasius. And in it, he summarized the essence of our belief about the Incarnation. Okay, here's what it says. The renewal of creation has been fashioned by the Word, who made it in the beginning. Thus, there is no inconsistency between creation and salvation, for the one Father has employed the same agent for both works, for creation and for salvation, affecting the salvation of the world through the same Word who made it in the beginning. Now, some of you are like, I don't understand anything that you just read. I don't get that. It sounds rather 4th century-ish. Well, that's okay. Let's unpack it. Let's unpack it. The text that he's referring to is John 1, where he refers to Jesus as the Word. And the significance of that Greek word is monumental. It's the Greek word logos, and it has a rich background in Greek philosophy. It came from a guy named Heraclitus, who's a Greek philosopher, and he had some interesting thoughts about this thing called the logos. He said, it is the ordering principle of the world. So he looked around and said, look at all of the systems. Look at how everything works together. It all seems to make sense. There seems to be some level of design in it. So there has to be some sort of ordering principle to the universe, right? There has to be some sort of something that's external from the world that kind of places logic and reason on it. Okay, that's the logic. It's the source of reason and wisdom. And he refers to it as the mind of God all the time in his writings about it. Well, the most interesting thing about what he believed about the Logos is that it was an independently functioning or existing truth that every person had access to. So independently existing, meaning it's outside of this time and space. So there's some type of truth that kind of goes beyond that, right? So all of this is Heraclitus' work on Logos. That is the word that John chooses to use several hundred years later to describe who Jesus is. In other words, John is making the claim that Jesus is the independently existing truth, that Jesus is the ordering principle of the world, that Jesus is the source of all wisdom and reason and logic, that he is the rational structure to the cosmos, that he is the mind of God. Listen again to how John describes the Logos. He said that he was in the beginning with God, he was God. In the beginning, all things came into being through him, and without him there wasn't a single thing that came into being. And what came into being through him was life, and that life was light to all people. Now, do you know what the first words that are ever recorded God saying in Genesis chapter 1? Anybody know? Let there be light. Let there be light. What John is doing is he is drawing a parallel between Genesis 1 and John 1. And he's saying, in Genesis 1 is the original creation. God created the heavens and the earth. In John 1, what he's saying is that the God who created the universe actually placed himself inside of it. He actually got into it. Jesus is the agent of creation. And so what Athanasius says is that the same agent that created the world originally has been introduced into the world as a part of it now. Why? Why? To renew it. To renew it. To initiate what Paul would call later a new creation, right in the middle of the old. You might even say that he came to unfreeze the old creation. Now, that's not biblical language at all, but it is C.S. Lewis's language, and a lot of us are familiar with that. Chronicles of Narnia describes this world, Narnia, that's been created by this lion, Aslan. And over the course of time, there's this witch, this white witch, who has become the ruler of that space, of that world. And she has initiated an eternal winter. Like it's always winter and never Christmas That's what the font Tumnus says. So we get this picture that there's a stagnant, cold world where nothing grows. Nothing grows. Animals are in hibernation. People are forced to gather around fires to keep warm. They don't just have the freedom to go and be and live up to their potential. The land's dry. It's barren. The air's bitter. There's reduced sunlight. The days are shorter. The darkness lingers. And there's no real sign of hope except for this old, ancient prophecy about the lion Aslan coming. But most people in the land have forgotten it or they don't believe it. That's the picture that C.S. Lewis describes before that initial coming of Christ, before the incarnation. And it's a brilliant, simple image that everybody can get, right? We can all kind of grab a hold of that and even resonate with it on a pretty deep level, I think. See, in the biblical story, what happens is that a long, hard winter sets in at an event called the fall of man, Genesis chapter 3. And G.K. Chesterton has some interesting thoughts about this. He says, if you've never experienced the fall, you know it. Okay, so that he says, if we are all conscious of the fall, even if we're conscious of nothing else. In other words, if we don't know anything else because of the world that we live in, because of the news that we watch, because of the things that happen to us, even if we've never learned about the fall, we know about it because we've experienced it. Even if we've experienced nothing else, we have all experienced the effects of the fall, he says. And then he says, we all remember the fall even if we forget the height. We all remember the fall even if we forget the height. Everybody knows that things aren't right. Everybody knows that things are broken. They're not the way that they're supposed to be. We're no different than humans who have lived throughout all of history looking around and saying, man, this is broken. This isn't right. Yet throughout the biblical story, there are these words spoken pointing to the emergence of spring, to the coming of a king through whom the winterized world would begin to thaw. This is the stuff that Matthew's genealogy connects from Abraham all the way through Jesus. He says, like, this is actually the fulfillment of a promise that's been here running throughout all of history. Here are some of those promises. Genesis 3:15, right after humans are exiled from the garden, talking to the serpent, God says, I'll cause hostility between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. He will strike your head, and you will strike his heel. So Jesus is the offspring of the woman who will crush the head of evil. I will make you into a great nation, God tells Abraham. All the families on earth will be blessed through you. It's Genesis 12:3. Jesus is the descendant through whom all the families on the earth will be blessed. The scepter will not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from his descendants until the coming of the one to whom it belongs, the one whom all nations will honor. That's Jacob blessing his son, Judah, Genesis 49. Jesus is the Lion of Judah, the rightful king to whom the ruling scepter belongs. I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not near. A star shall come out of Jacob, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel. That's Numbers 24. Jesus is the mysterious star coming out of Jacob. For when you die and you're buried with your ancestors, David, I will raise up one of your descendants, your own offspring, and I will make his kingdom strong. He's the one who will build a house, a temple for my name, and I will secure his royal throne forever. Your house and your kingdom will continue before me for all time, and your throne will be secure forever. That's 2 Samuel 7. Jesus is a descendant of David that will sit on the throne forever. Nevertheless, that time of darkness and despair will not go on forever, but there will be a time in the future when Galilee of the Gentiles, which lies along the road that runs between the Jordan and the sea, will be filled with glory. The people who walk in darkness will see a great light. For those who live in a land of deep darkness, a light will shine. For you will break the yoke of their slavery and lift the heavy burden from their shoulders. You will break the oppressor's rod. For a child is born to us, a son is given to us. The government will rest on his shoulders, and he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. His government and its peace will never end. He will rule with fairness and justice from the throne of his ancestor David for all eternity. That's Isaiah 9. Jesus is the light in the darkness who will break the chains of slavery, and in whose name all oppression shall cease. He will cut off the chariot from Ephraim and war horse from Jerusalem, and the battle bow shall be cut off, and he shall command peace to the nations. His dominion shall be from sea to sea and from the river to the ends of the earth. That's Zechariah 9. Jesus is the humble warrior, ushering in an era of peace and abundance whose dominion will cover the whole earth. Even in the midst of hopeless moments, even in the midst of the coldest nights, darkest hours, Israel had hope that one day the descendant king who had promised would come and make everything right. But that promise hadn't come true yet. Still, just because they were in the waiting didn't mean that God wasn't working. Just because they were in the waiting, it didn't mean that God wasn't working. You see, winter is only a season, and it always gives way to spring. Every time, always and forever, winter gives way to spring. One of my favorite things about living in Ohio is that we're a 4-season climate. So we get to experience all 4 seasons kind of in all of their fullness and all of their beauty. And that's cool because we actually get to learn from that. We can learn a lot from nature, especially the changing of the seasons. Because the seasons are all marked with specific things that are pretty parallel to our lives and the rhythm that we kind of live in. So winter, it's a time of dormancy. Everything looks dead. It's not. You see a tree and you're like, that tree's dead for the winter. It's not dead. It's just dormant. It's slowed down the production of food, and it has stopped using so much energy, right? And it's not dead. It's dormant. It's still very much alive. Beneath the surface, there is life, just as invisible above. So it's just slowed down, stopped growing for a little while. Spring is marked by the bursting forth of new life, isn't it? But there's still a little bit of chill in the air. Summer, it's marked by aggressive growth. That's fruit and weeds. You got to pull weeds a lot, don't you? You're like, man, I can't keep up. There's weeds everywhere. Mow your grass 2 times a week. I mean, aggressive growth in the summer. Fruit and weeds. Good stuff and bad stuff. And then you have autumn, which is marked by harvest, where the fruit and the weeds are both pulled up and then they're separated from each other. Question to you is, what season are you in right now? What season are you in right now? Maybe you're in a winter and you know you're not dead, but you're dormant. You've stopped growing and you feel cold, you feel a little bitter. Maybe you're going through a really difficult time. Maybe you have financial struggles. Maybe you're having marital things. Maybe you experience some grief and you're just in like a really dark moment right now. You're in the winter. You're still alive, but you're dormant. Maybe you're in spring and you just been planting things and that you're already seeing the little things pop up through the ground and you're like, man, this is great. In winter, there's a characterization like the feeling, the emotion is hopelessness. In spring, the feeling or emotion is anticipation, you're looking forward to it. Like what's gonna happen? It's just excitement that's there. It's building. Maybe you're in spring. Maybe you're in summer. It's characterized by just steady, faithful work, right? And you're seeing all kinds of things in your life. You're just fruitful all the way around, but you might be tired. Long days, sweaty, tired, but you're faithful. Get your head down, and you're just remaining faithful, and you're seeing God work, seeing fruit. Maybe you're in fall, and or the autumn. I switched autumn and fall because I already talked about the fall of man. Let's not confuse those. Autumn, you're in autumn, and you're just experiencing a harvest, and it's great. It's amazing. The feeling or emotion that's kind of associated with that is like completeness, wholeness, satisfaction. You just feel like, man, he has brought the work to fruition. Whichever season you are in, however you identified yourself, there's a few things that you can know. Just hold on tight to in terms of these things are true. First is that seasons are a part of God's created rhythm. Genesis 1 actually says that God created seasons. All God's design. Seasons are actually a part of God's design. Also, just because you're in a moment of waiting doesn't mean that he isn't working. Just because you're in the waiting, it doesn't mean that he isn't working. He is in the waiting. You don't have to wait until you get out of the waiting to be with him. He's there. He's with you. He's walking through it with you. He's in the waiting. We sang that. It's a beautiful song. He's in the waiting. He's in the waiting. So take courage. Hold on to your hope. Third thing is that he's faithful to see his work through. Paul writes to the Ephesians and says, if he started a work in you, he will finish it. He's faithful. He will complete whatever work he's already begun in you. He'll do it.